Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science Podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Aisha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com. And this week I'm delighted to introduce a very special guest on our show. We have with us Gene Mack, who is the CEO and President of Gain Therapeutics. And Gain Therapeutics is a company pioneering AI-powered small molecule discovery for diseases with high unmet medical needs. Gene joined Gain Therapeutics in April 2024. He has 25 years of experience in the life sciences sector, spanning clinical research, financing, and capital markets, investing, corporate strategy, and business development as well. Prior to joining Gain, Gene was CFO at Imcyse between 2021 and 2023, and at OncoC4, which spun out of Merck's acquisition of OncoImmune in 2020, where he had also been CFO. Gene has held CFO roles at multiple biopharma companies, raising over $350 million in IPOs and equity deals. Prior to his operational experience, Gene covered the biotechnology and life sciences sector as a senior publishing analyst at various investment banks. Gene received both his Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and MBA in Finance from Fordham University. To learn more about the drug discovery work Gene is leading at Gain Therapeutics, let's turn to him now. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Gene.
Thank you, Aisha, and thanks to Xtalks for giving us a chance to, or an opportunity to talk about Gain.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you. And so I'd like to first start off by asking you, what attracted you to join Gain Therapeutics? Obviously a very wonderful company, but what are some of the specific facets and aspects that really spoke to you? And could you also tell us a bit about the company's core missions and goals?
Yeah, sure. So what initially attracted me to Gain Therapeutics is their pretty audacious goal of trying to deliver disease-modifying therapies in some very, very significantly under-addressed neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Those patient populations have been woefully underserved. And the drug development community has struggled to address the underlying aspects driving those diseases, and an opportunity to potentially make some progress there was very, very attractive to me. And in addition to that, there were some board members of Gain that I had relationships with going back to my days as an analyst on Wall Street, covering them at previous companies. So there's a level of comfort and trust with the board that was easy to develop, which made it a lot more attractive to join Gain last year.
That's wonderful. And speaking about your background in finance, you do have an extensive background and expertise that spans finance, clinical research, and strategy. And so how have all of those experiences really shaped your approach to now lead a company like Gain as CEO?
So biotech companies are all about uncertainty. And we put these clinical candidates, these drug candidates, into black boxes for a year or 2 years in some cases before we find out whether or not all that investment has returned a product. So a capital market strategy for a small biotech company that is working on its very first product is vital, and it has to address multiple types of things. So not only do you have to make sure that you are designing clinical studies that address the patients, of course, foremost, and the needs of those patients. So you like to design clinical trials that try to take into account what patients are really going through in their daily lives. But you also have to consider your investors and the fact that many of them have to show quarterly returns to their investment committees. And so you have to structure clinical trials and structure milestones, corporate milestones, in such a way you can show progress Large pharma companies have the luxury of being able to run very, very well designed large trials that investors are patient to wait for, primarily because there's so many other things going on at the company and so many other sorts of news flow. For a company that's struggling with their lead asset, and they all do, it's a bit more strategic. So you need to report progress in more frequent increments so that you can give your investors comfort that you are making progress. And that's the challenge there. And so a good understanding of capital markets is sort of vital for a company whose main source of capital is going to come from capital markets and investing dollars.
And in terms of talking more about Gain's focus areas, the company is dedicated to really looking and tackling diseases with high unmet medical needs. And so, what are some of those diseases that Gain is currently focused on?
So the first disease that we are focused on is Parkinson's with our lead asset. GT02287 targets a particular enzyme that is becoming more and more well understood as a broad acting enzyme in the pathophysiology of Parkinson's disease. That enzyme, glucocerebrosidase, we call it GCase for short. The enzyme's activity is responsible for broad maintenance and support functions in the cell that go beyond one singular cellular compartment. So multiple cellular compartments where this particular enzyme plays a role. So its functioning is vital, and we see a slight decline in patients that have idiopathic Parkinson's. That's regular, sort of. I hate to call it this, but plain vanilla. There is no such thing as plain vanilla Parkinson's. But your typical Parkinson's patients, they have a lower level of GCase relative to the healthy population. There's also a small population of Parkinson's patients with a gene mutation that specifically leads to the misfolding of glucocerebrosidase and its loss of function. So initially, we thought that genetic mutation would be our target population, but in our healthy volunteer studies with GT02287, we noticed a increase in healthy volunteer GCase. So that allows us to think more broadly about the idiopathic Parkinson's population. Hopefully, we can maybe make some progress there as well. And one of the things, just kind of calling back to your previous question, how do you guys think about capital market strategy and integrating that into your clinical development? So one particular example of that is after our healthy volunteer study that we completed with our lead asset last year, that asset was fully ready for phase 2, a large 250 patient phase 2 Parkinson's trial with standard, primary endpoints that you'd see in any sort of Parkinson's trial. But we're taking an intermediate step first and doing a smaller pilot phase 1B study in Parkinson's patients, but in only about 15 to 20 of them. So we can see what sorts of signals of efficacy might appear sooner. And that is for the purpose of keeping investors engaged and keeping the clinical community also engaged that we're making progress. So again, that difference between what a large pharma is able to do versus what a smaller biotech company is able to do with its resources.
And in terms of speaking about the differences between big pharma and smaller biotech, apart from the investor side of things, and as you mentioned, that you at smaller biotechs that you may have to have more interim readouts, more frequent interim readouts. What are some of the other differences that you can speak to, having worked, in both arenas?
Well, we are able to move things faster. Decisions happen a lot quicker than in larger pharma and commercial companies as well. There's significant layers of regulation and guidelines that need to get adhered to for a commercial stage company that we can sort of not have to worry about and finance. So it's those kinds of things that allow us to spend more time on clinical development. I think that's mainly, the differences between a larger company and a smaller company. We are focused on a smaller number of projects, but they are the existential lifeblood of the company in the early days, such as ours. So we really need to get it right, and you need to try to get it right the first time, so that you can keep investors enthused, and you can also maintain credibility as competent management team.
Indeed. And also, in terms of, I may be wrong, but it does appear that smaller biotechs do have perhaps they're more engaged at the earlier stages as well, as opposed to bigger companies that can usually acquire assets through acquisitions and things of that nature. And so, is that another difference in your experience? And then when we talk about early stage development and employing early stage technologies and things of that nature, what is your approach to fundraising for innovations at the earlier stages, as Gain is doing? And I'd also like to talk a bit more about the company's platform as well later in the conversation.
So again, our financing strategy and the way that we determine or the way we integrate things is really on the back of good data. You know, we don't make it a practice to talk about things prematurely, or when we're looking for signals of efficacy, that can be a very dangerous pursuit for a small biotech company, because you can see encouraging things early that do not maintain throughout the study, and you can see negative things early that do not maintain during the study. So one of the risks that biotech companies obviously run is having a false positive or a false negative readout too soon. And that is a very, very difficult situation to unwind, because you can lose your credibility with your investors. You also now have you now have conflicting data readout from a compound that maybe should have been held to that standard, by trying to look for an answer too quick. So we're often trying to balance looking for an answer too quick with providing real progress updates, so that what we say is, that winds up being accurate when the study's all, completed and finalized. So that can be a real challenge.
Indeed. And in terms of Gain's AI driven drug discovery platform, which I was reading a bit more about, what can you tell us about that? And how does it, when we talk about what differentiates a certain company or a project from others in the field, how do you see this particular platform or Gain's overall approach in the current biotech landscape?
Yeah, so Magellan is an AI drug discovery platform that the company had acquired. Let me step back for a second, just give you an idea of where the company, looking for your early questions, talked about the genesis of Gain Therapeutics. So Gain Therapeutics was founded by Khalid Islam, who is our current chairman. He's a scientific founder and our current chairman. He also sits on the board of a company called Menorix, Spanish company. And about a decade ago, Khalid had recognized that some early stage assets in that pipeline that had been developed by this very, very efficient uh, compound screening platform that Menorix had but wasn't using. And he decided to form a new company, taking the platform and some of the earlier stage assets forward to really pay more attention to them and accelerate their growth. So that was the genesis of Gain Therapeutics. In that time, so that was around 2017 or so. Over the next 4 or 5 years, that platform evolved into what we now call Magellan. So moving beyond the compounds that are in the public domain to be able to screen for potential compounds that are completely novel and not known to the public domain. So what Magellan tries to do is build it. It looks for pocket binding sites on proteins, and that are of interest to us. And it, through a series of computational physics calculations, computational chemistry calculations, medicinal chemistry, coaches this all through. It tries to speed up these binding kinetic calculations can take, let's say, up to about 10 minutes per compound. And that can be an enormous amount of time when you're trying to do that for a billion compounds. So what we're trying to do with Magellan is take that computational, take the time that it takes to get those calculations done and make it more efficient, so that 10 minutes becomes seconds or nanoseconds, really. And we can do that by using proprietary calculations that we know that work and feeding that into Magellan. But you need to do a lot of data entry in order to have an AI platform that can significantly reduce workload. And I think this is going to be a challenge for the industry. I think, biotech spoke very, very quickly about AI and their application of AI. I think, building a drug is far more complicated than machinery or those types of equipment that AI can also help with quickly. And I think, we maybe got over our skis a little bit of how quickly we would see results from AI integration into biotech. But we are seeing the progress. We have been able to increase the productivity of our own discovery efforts. You can see that in the formation of our platform, all driven off of Magellan. And refining it over time. It's almost like, an iPhone. So we'll come out, we're constantly working on the operating system and creating newer versions of it. And through the increased data entry and those, as we put in more data, the platform gets more efficient and more productive. Until about annually, we probably have a new version of it.
Yeah, to your point about, I think, AI just being adopted so quickly across almost every industry, and biotech being no exception. It comes down to whether are we just using it for the sake of using it, or is there really a focused utility that is there? And so I think that alone, I would say, would probably be a great differentiator between companies and between different approaches in the space currently. And in terms of speaking about the biotech sector, as we've been seeing in the past couple of years, in the past decade, a lot of uncertainty, as you mentioned in the beginning. So from your perspective, having seen both the investment and operational sides of things, what is the current landscape and what trends are you watching, quote unquote trends, most closely right now? And where do you see the sector heading in the next couple of years from here?
Yeah, so right now I think I think right now we're focused on a lot of the macro issues that are happening that are sort of beyond our control. It's the sort of the internal sector dynamics are taking a back seat to things like, we totally had some clarity out of how FDA is going to function with the new administration. Things like that are kind of driving a lot of sentiment in the sector. What will happen with reimbursement, and how will the current administration, new administration, change the dynamics in our sector? So that's why those things are taking a back seat right now, because they may change. And right now we're sort of at the mercy of the macro environment that's happening. I can tell you, there was an enormous financing. There was an enormous financing going on in biotech as we entered into the COVID crisis, and now for very obvious reasons, people understood that the last thing that was going to be encumbered was healthcare provision. So a lot of dollars flew into healthcare because it was viewed as a very safe place to be. Because where else would we be? That's the priority right now. That was the priority of the globe. So a lot of financing dollars came into the space, and I would say 19 and 20 started to dry up in 2021, and we haven't seen it since. This has been one of the coldest nuclear winters in biotech financing since I can remember in my career. Thank you for the 25 years. It actually is 30 now.
I really appreciate those perspectives, indeed. And in terms of once again, when we talk about asset management, how do you really, may seem like an elementary question, but how do you prioritize really, the hits and the finds and that you get in that drug discovery process, which is very complex, whether it's computational, whether you're working things out, mapping things out at the protein level. So how do you really take a look at targets and be like, all right, we're going to go ahead with this one? And then also, how far along in that early development are you able to make those decisions, and when is the appropriate time to make those decisions, whether to go ahead or to not? So in your extensive experience, again, both from a finance perspective and then obviously the biotech aspect as well.
Well, the very first thing you have to do is be very, very honest organizationally about what your capabilities are before you even before you even put a pipette together, you need to understand what the company's strengths are and what their resources are, because you know not every small biotech company is capable of developing a Parkinson's drug. Do we have the expertise to do it? How far can we take it? Because does a company, does a $50 million biotech company wind up commercializing a Parkinson's disease drug? I really don't know the answers to that, because there's a long way to go before we get there. But what's key to understand is, can you take an asset or something that is turning into an asset? Can you take it far long enough to increase the value more significantly than if it was in anybody else's hands? And that's really your litmus test. Should we partner this at this point, or should we continue to move it along? We do have those conversations all the time internally. We're constantly looking at the progress that we're making in certain programs, evaluating whether or not we're getting over or out of our area of expertise, in which case it's now time to bring somebody else in or a partner. And so we regularly evaluate the progress that's being made across all our programs. As it relates to our lead program, there's a healthy internal debate around, can this company really pull off a phase 2 study in Parkinson's disease? That's a $50 million trial if it's designed robustly enough. And can a $50 million biotech company undertake that? Now it can, if the financing presents itself, and the company is able to either bring in the talent that it needs to advance the next step, or develop it on its own. Where we're sitting, we are fully capable of taking our compound into phase 2. I think if we're successful doing that, we will have proved to investors that we're probably the best, or that GT-02287 is best served in our hands and not in a partner's hands. So they will give us the capital. So we will be able to get that capital from investors. Now, we will find out very quickly if we're not able to undertake that endeavor on our own. Investors will let us know, in which case we will seek to partner. So we have a very, very active business development effort ongoing. We've been talking to large pharma and large biotech and mid biotech potential partners for years now about our program in Parkinson's. And they're very interested in seeing the data that comes out. We're very interested in socializing that data with them. We'll talk to investors at the same time, and we'll see where the options lead us. If we have made progress with a program that is truly disease modifying, I think that the financing problem should take care of itself, quite honestly, because there's such a dramatic need in Parkinson's for something beyond symptomatic help.
Now, I think you've covered a couple of the questions I was going to ask really beautifully in that response there, just in terms of, what are the pressing needs right now in a disease like Parkinson's? And I think disease modifying therapies, more so than just saying, personalized medicine, perhaps it's disease modifying is really, I'm hearing more and more so that being the focus. And is that, I hate to say trend, but is that really where the space is going in terms of biotech and a disease like Parkinson's disease?
One of the benefits of being an analyst for as long as I was is I saw drug development cycles across several different disciplines of medicine, several different disease indications, and you can learn a lot. There's a lot of cross learning that you can do. And one of the observations I made through my career is that as drug development makes progress in a specific disease area, that disease expands, if you will. Each drug changes its commercial market, and because patients' bodies change, adapting to that drug for the better, hopefully. But then you uncover other additional situations where more drug development is necessary to support those situations. One of the first things that come to mind is psoriasis. I remember when the very first antibody for psoriasis was approved, and the very first sort of systemic or disease modifying therapies, effective disease modifying therapies for psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis, for that matter, were developed. And quite frankly, I don't know off the top of my head how many of these things there are now. And it seems as drugs become more effective in a particular disease area, those patients' lifestyles become better. They notice other areas where they might need support, and the disease kind of spreads out, if you will. It becomes more granular. We treat certain kinds of aspects. Remember, we treated cancer with just chemotherapy. At one point, now we're looking for specific gene mutations, and there might be a host of antibodies that might be affected in one particular oncology indication with a bunch of combinations of other drugs with it, right? So we're getting to this personalization aspect all diseases. And as you make progress treating patients, the phenotypes become more significant. You start to address individual sets. And right now, Parkinson's happens to be a very heterogeneous disease. Some patients present with cognitive impairment first. Some patients present with locomotor impairment first. Sometimes there's other things that happen, GI disturbances, sensory, which is not cognitive per se, but I'm talking about sense of smell, sense of hearing, sense of taste. Those things can be more prominent in some patients over others. There are a lot of thought leaders who want to call it Parkinson's diseases. There's some thought that they might, that at least the Parkinson's may start to evolve different types of names for the different phenotypes. But I think as we start developing drugs in Parkinson's disease, this may be true for Alzheimer's and other diseases too. As we start developing drugs in Parkinson's, we're going to learn more about the disease. We're going to be able to treat it more effectively too. Each innovation does build on the next one, which is one sort of avenue for hope. We're getting closer. Help is on the way. Disease modifying therapies will work at some point. And Parkinson's, hopefully, we're on the cusp of that right now. I'm excited about that.
That's wonderful, and really, it's about not just drug discovery, but I think also discovering more about the biology and how the disease is evolving in patients. And I really like that perspective that you gave to us there. And in terms of some of the key milestones, I know that you've touched on some of them, but what can we expect in the next year or so, in the next couple of years from Gain?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we were conducting a small pilot study in actual Parkinson's patients with our lead program. It's going to include 15 to 20 patients in the initial cohort. We expect to complete the enrollment of that study this summer, and we believe that we'll be reporting data out from that study for throughout the whole second half of this year. We don't know exactly when those time points are. They're not so much scheduled yet because we're still enrolling some of these patients. And we don't know when. Right now, they're going to be dosed for 90 days in our study as it's currently designed. The very first patient just recently finished his 90-day follow-up, so that was exciting. And we're just kind of waiting with bated breath for more and more patients to get through the dosing period of the study so that we can understand what GT-02287 has been able uh, to achieve in terms of their disease biology over that time period. We're not expecting a lot of motor function improvement or cognitive function improvement. Those take very, very long to evolve and to materialize. But we can look at biomarkers that are predictive of those improvements. And hopefully that is the progress that GT-02287 is making in this 90-day dosing period from this particular study.
Wonderful. And we'll definitely be keeping an eye out here at Xtalks on all of those developments. And wish you all the best for that. And I want to just ask you one last question in terms of, again, having over 3 decades of experience in this space. What advice would you give to people entering biotech leadership roles in particular in this space and time today?
I would say for leadership roles, make sure you adopt I would say that. I would say make sure you adopt um, a very, very rigorous discipline to patient needs. Because at the end of the day, if you're focusing on there, you may fail, but you're going to fail for the right reasons, not the wrong ones. And the sector will let you live through that. So it's always patients first. And I would say from just an operational perspective, you need to also adopt a culture and a habit of promising what you know you can deliver. Almost not under promising, not sandbagging, but make sure what you say you can either do or improve upon.
That is very sound advice indeed. And I'm sure our listeners and everyone, our audience is watching, definitely can, glean some very important insights from this conversation and that advice at the end there. So Gene, thank you so much for being on the show today. We really, really appreciate your time and insights. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much.
All right, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.